Hello again, everyone. In this video we're going to take a look at the different data types that are available for you as part of your development efforts working with the Oracle database. A data type simply defines the type of data that will be stored in a column inside your database, inside of a table inside your database. And we're going to look at all the different data types that are out there. If you watched my previous video on the beginner video for creating a table, we used the wizard that's part of Oracle SQL Developer to go out there and create a basic table to hold some music information. We're going to look at some of the advanced features of that wizard now, and one of the parts of the advanced features is giving us access to all the different data types that are available to us. So I'm going to connect to my database, and I'm not going to go in as the sys user, I'm going to go in as the HR user here. And again, if you remember from my previous video, if you right click on tables, you can then create a new table and it brings you into the wizard. In the previous video, this is the part of the wizard where we spent all of our time. We created a couple of different columns and created a new table called music. If you click on advanced, you have access to the advanced part of the wizard for creating a table. If I go back here to the standard part and I click on data type, you can see I only have 5 options for me here: blob, clob, date, number, and varchar2. These are the data types that you'll use most of the time when you're working with your Oracle database. These are by far the 5 most common data types that are out there. And certainly date, number, and varchar for storing character data is where you're going to spend most of your time. But that's not the only ones that you're limited to. Oracle has a ton of different data types that you can define for your columns, and we're going to take a look at those right now. So if I click on Advanced, I have a little more of a complex wizard here, where you can see I can create a whole bunch of different table types. I can create external tables, index organized tables. There'll be other videos that talk about all of those different table options. But one of the things that's now available to me is if I go to the type field here and I do the drop down, I have the 5 that we saw in the basic wizard available to me at the top of the list here: varchar2, number, date, clob, and blob. But then I have all these other different data types. And you can see Oracle has a ton of different data types that you can define for your database, and we're going to take a look at all of the different ones that are there now. Varchar2 is the most common. Varchar2 is what you're going to use to store character data. And it's called varchar because it's really a variable character field. Oracle doesn't store all the different blank spaces that goes along with your data. So let's say I was going to create a column that kept my employee last name. I really don't know how big to size that, right? I'm certainly going to have people with short last names, people with long last names. If I make it a 40 character field, that's a lot of wasted space, because most people obviously don't have 40 characters in their last name, but I want to make it big enough for people who have hyphenated names and all of those different things, just to make sure that I can store it. If I create a varchar column, Oracle is very efficient at not storing extra spaces. It doesn't store a lot of the additional information. So if I had somebody with a real short name with only 3 or 4 characters, I wouldn't waste the 38 or 39 spaces or 37 spaces that go along with storing that information. So varchar2 is going to be your most common data type for storing character data. Number, again, pretty self-explanatory. When I want to have a number field, this is what I'm going to use as my data type. Normally you have number fields for stuff that you're going to do some kind of arithmetic operation on. You're going to add, subtract, summarize, find a minimum or a maximum. You certainly can use a number field for something like a zip code. But if you do that, just remember, if you start doing business in the United States, postal codes all are numeric based. If you start doing business in a country like Canada, they have characters in their postal codes, so that obviously wouldn't be able to store that information. So numeric fields are usually only there for things that you're going to do addition, subtraction, summarizations on, stuff like that. You obviously would never want to sum a zip code. That doesn't make any kind of sense. So be careful what you choose there for a number. Date fields, again, pretty self-explanatory. You want to store some kind of date in my database. That's what I'm going to use. Clobs and blobs. A clob, what the word clob stands for, is character large object. And a character large object is used to store unstructured data inside your database, character data inside your database. A clob can store up to 8 terabytes of character data inside the database. So it's one of those fields that obviously you can put a tremendous amount of information in. It's the type of thing where you might want to store, let's say, a document that you can use another tool like Oracle Text to index that information. You can't just select clobs and blobs out of your database, because clob, again, is going to be a whole bunch of character information. A blob stands for binary large objects. So binary large objects can be used to store information like pictures or video or sound files inside your database. You obviously can't just select that information, because how do you select the sound file out of the database? You have to use another tool like Oracle Forms or Oracle JDeveloper to say, when I pull information from this record, this is the type of information. It's a sound file, so I automatically want to associate that with something in a browser to play a sound file, or display a video file, or display a picture, or something like that. But those are the types of data types that you can use to store information like that. Clobs, like I said, are for character data, up to 8 terabytes of storage. Blobs store binary data, unstructured binary data, and those can also hold 8 terabytes of storage. So again, these are the 5 that are the most common that you're going to use. But then we have all of these other data types, and we're going to go through these real quick. B file stands for a binary file, and that is a way of storing unstructured binary data in the operating system that's actually running your Oracle database. So in this case, we have binary data. It doesn't get actually stored in the database. It's sitting on the operating system file system, and it's basically just a pointer. So if we have a column that's defined as a B file, it's basically just a pointer that's pointing to somewhere in the operating system and say, hey, there's this file, and then we can pull it that way. So it's not something that we have to convert and actually store inside the database. Blobs and clobs are for that. But if we have this binary data that we want to store, maybe, like I said, it's a picture file or a sound file at the operating system level, we can use a B file to do that. Binary float and binary double are ways of using floating point number arithmetic using the native machine arithmetic. And again, this is all binary based. Binary doubles can hold 32-bit numbers. Binary floats can hold 64-bit numbers. Binary floats use binary precision. This enables a lot faster arithmetic calculations and usually reduces storage requirements for those types of applications that have to store numbers. They're frequently used in scientific computations. It's not something you would probably want to have on a regular basis. You'd probably use number to store typical numbers, but if you have the need to have those types of things, Oracle provides it for you. Blobs we talked about before. A character field is similar to a varchar, but it's not variable. So if I say I'm going to have a 40 byte character field, Oracle is going to store all of those 40 bytes whether I use all of them or not. So character fields are usually really good for something that you know the actual size of. So like a gender field might be defined as a character 1 field if you're just going to have M and F in it. Yes or no, true or false. Those types of things are really good for characters. Character varying is one of those things that's used for backwards compatibility and SQL standards that are out there. So a character varying is the same thing as a varchar. It's just a different way of specifying it. If you need that type of compatibility with different databases and you have to conform to SQL standards. Character field, same thing as a char field. Character varying, same thing as a char varying. Again, a lot of these are just there for backwards compatibility and compatibility with SQL standards that are out there. We talked about clobs and dates before. Dec and decimal, those are fixed point numbers that can have up to 38 decimal digits. Dec and decimal, again, are for all intents and purposes, the same thing. Double precision are floating point numbers that can have up to 126 binary digits in them. So obviously, if you need that level of precision in your numbers, that's what you'll use there. Float, basically the same thing as a double precision, 126 binary digits. Int, integer, obviously those are going to be integer numbers. Those can hold 38 integer digits. Same thing. Again, just the naming is slightly different just to conform to the standards that are out there. Interval day and interval year are different ways of storing information about dates inside your system, so you can get information about the intervals between different days and store those as column fields inside your database if you want to do that. A long and a long raw are data types that allow you to store large pieces of information inside your database. Longs and long raws can handle up to 2 gigabytes of storage. Again, raw format is kind of like a binary format there. There's no formatting that goes on with any of the information. It's just stored raw inside your database. National in front of all of these other pieces here: national char, char varying, character, character varying, nchar, nchar varying, nclob. Anything with the n in front of it uses the national character set of your database. And this is really important if you're gathering data from different databases that have different character sets in them, and you want to have a uniform way of representing that information. These are the different types of things that you would use in those cases, and it's the same principle here. Character varying is just like a varchar. Character is just like a character field. Character and character varying, nchar, nchar varying, all just like the other string functions that we talked about earlier, but they all have national information based on the national character set that's defined inside your database. Number field, again, pretty self-explanatory. That's where we're going to store numbers. Numeric, the same way. Here's another varchar that has an n in front of it, so that is sensitive to the national sets inside your database. Raw fields are character fields, again, that don't have any formatting associated with them. So this information is just dumped directly into the database. Oracle doesn't know anything about this except that you're just storing raw binary data inside your database. Reals are just like floats and double precision, but they're only single precision. So instead of 126 binary digits stored, reals can only store 63. Row ID is a real interesting type of column. Sometimes you need to reference the actual row inside of a particular table, and you don't have information about the index or any of the data or anything like that. Row ID is usually used for administrative type functions inside your database, but sometimes it's important to have that data if you're going to do some database administration type tools. So you can actually define a column as a row ID, and it'll store that information for you. Small int is the same thing as an int or an integer. 38 integer digits to store that. A timestamp stores more information than just the date field that's out there. It stores information about the date, hours, minutes, seconds, a whole bunch of really complex things that you can have in here. You can actually go down to hundreds and 10,000ths of a second if you want to store that type of information. The URow ID is similar to the row ID, but it's used for something called an index organized table. Oops, sorry, just clicked over here. Something called an indexed organized table, and you can see that the table types up here, we have index organized as one of our choices here. We can get row ID information for an indexed organized table, and I'll have another video on that coming up pretty soon. And varchar is there for, again, backwards compatibility. That's in older versions of the Oracle database. What people use for strings now is varchar 2. So, as you can see, Oracle has a lot of different data types that are available to us to store information about data inside of our database. I haven't even talked about types, which I'm going to talk about in another video. A complex data type is where you can actually define a type and associate it with a particular column. So even with all of these different data types that are out there, you're not limited to even just all of these. If you have a specific requirement to create a type, you can use that, and you can use that from, let's say, a different schema. I don't think anything in the HR schema, there's no types defined. It's thinking about it. Yeah, there's no types defined under the HR schema. But if you go under the OE schema, there's all of these different types available. And if we have access to those types, if we've been granted privileges on those types, we can actually use those different types as part of our type definition as part of the database. So you can see I can pull in all this information. I can assign this actions T type from the OE schema to this column 1 inside my table. So there's a lot of really complex, interesting things that you can do with it. But in terms of all of the different data types that are out there, Oracle gives you a tremendous amount of flexibility to store the types of data that you want to in a database, and all of these things are optimized for getting the most out of your Oracle database.